This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
Hello and welcome to the latest Blood Red podcast with me, Matt Addison. Today's episode is a look at a former Liverpool midfielder who played under Rafa Benitez when he won the Champions League in 2005, before he then moved to Real Madrid in 2009 and then Bayern Munich under Pep Guardiola in 2014. Xabi Alonso is now manager at Real Sociedad's B team in the third tier of Spanish football, as he aims to develop their players and take them back possibly to the second division. Alonso made no secret towards the latter part of his career that he wanted to move into management, with the move from Real Madrid to Bayern Munich largely down to the chance to work with Guardiola, having already worked under Jose Mourinho and Carlo Ancelotti. So far, it seems that Alonso's career choice was the right one. Now in his second season as Real Sociedad B boss, Alonso has made an extraordinary impact on many of his players. Last year, the team missed out on the playoffs, but such was the form of so many of Alonso's young players that several took up that step to the first team in La Liga ahead of this season. Real Sociedad started this campaign with no fewer than 16 players in the first team squad who'd come through the club's own youth academy, and that's more than any other La Liga side. Now, with a new group of starlets to work with, Alonso has promotion in sight. So what next? Well, we're about to find out. Alonso is heading in the right direction. So my first guest is a Spanish football writer based in Lisbon, Alan Feehely. Alan, thank you for joining me. I want to start really with Xabi Alonso's sort of style of play, the sort of way that his team's set up. So could you talk us first through his tactics, and even more simply than that, really, just the formation that he's using at the moment?
Yeah, so Real Sociedad B their tactics are basically based off the first team. So it's kind of very much possession-based, high pressing, kind of the typical modern team, you could say. And tactics-wise, it's kind of primarily maybe a 4-3-3 or a 4-1-4-1. But then it can also evolve into a 4-2-3-1 or maybe a 3 at the back as well. Like he's quite flexible. That's actually a hallmark of his whole kind of ethos, is that he can be very flexible and he can adapt to in-game situations. I think it's something he said that he really appreciated from Jose Mourinho's management style, that kind of ability to adapt as the game requires, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I think fundamentally it's kind of maybe the three in midfield is very important to him, because obviously as a defensive midfielder like he was, that kind of holding player is very, very important. And we'll probably talk about it later, but two of the players who are currently in the Real Sociedad first team are holding midfielders. Zubi Miranda and Guevara, and they've both been kind of coached by him before they came into the team. So I think that's the fundamental kind of cornerstone of his managerial style.
And you mentioned there the sort of adaptability and the ability to move between various formations. Is that game to game, or is that even within game? I mean, we've certainly seen with Jose Mourinho, he's not afraid to make a substitution, 20 minutes into a game if it needs to be. Is there a sort of management within games as well as depending on the opponent game to game?
100%, because Xabi is someone who I think will never go through the motions whatever he does. And I think the reason that he actually was attracted to management was because of this game within a game, as in like being a manager isn't a kind of a means to an end to him. It's actually an activity in itself. Like a manager isn't just existing in relation to the players he's coaching. To be a manager is a skill in itself. I think Xabi appreciates that. And he's mentioned many, many times that he kind of has this system where he has maybe plan A, plan B, and plan C. And while plan A, maybe his overriding philosophy, for instance, like we saw with Marcelo Bielsa yesterday against Manchester United, who's kind of an ideologue, I think Xabi actually prioritizes the concept of being able to change. So for him, for instance, you spoke about in the past how it's important to have, say, plan A, plan B, and plan C, but then also to be able to kind of adapt within the game and convey his message to the players in a way that doesn't overload them with information. So, for instance, he kind of always says they should know plan A, but they shouldn't know plan B and plan C until they need to. And for him, it's a skill to actually be able to convey this change in plan and the importance of changing the plan and why you're changing the plan within the game. And it's kind of a skill that he has that he can actually convey to the players in that sense. So, yeah, I think it's definitely that's the case.
Yeah, there's a lot of different managers that he played under. Jose Mourinho is one of them. We'll get onto a couple of the others a little bit later. But is there somebody who stands out maybe as having influenced him more than the others? Is there somebody that you would say is sort of molding his style in the same way?
Well, I think like he has had maybe the most expansive history of managers that most players in world football, because you've Rafa Benitez, Manuel Pellegrini, Jose Mourinho, Pep Guardiola, Carlo Ancelotti. Like it really is kind of a who's who of international management, you know. I think with Rafa, obviously his kind of personal relationship with Rafa maybe wasn't the greatest, and that's kind of well documented, and things didn't end very well there with him. But I think he really appreciated his kind of level of tactical intelligence and also his kind of attention to detail. And also he kind of mentioned in the past that he found it really impressive how Rafa was able to build a link between the players and the club, so that you had, even though, you know, Xabi is obviously from San Sebastian, he was kind of clearly linked with the city Liverpool when he was living there, especially. And I think he says that that's kind of a trait that's really valuable in management. But in terms of one specific reference, I would say no, because he's kind of made it very clear that he's his own man. As a person, he's a very self-confident person, and he's kind of never going to be a carbon copy of anybody. He's spoken in the past that that's kind of dangerous to even do, because you'll always be a kind of substandard imitation. So I think his whole thesis and kind of concept is around taking bits from all these managers, maybe kind of underlined by an overriding work ethic and attention to detail, and then kind of creating his own system. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you talk through the tactical flexibility, that relationship with his players, it sort of reminds me a little bit of Pep Guardiola. I'm sure there must be a bit of Guardiola in his management, because he moved to Bayern Munich, I think primarily really to work with Guardiola and learn from him.
Yeah, well, he said that Barcelona team that he faced when he was at Madrid, because he was of course part of the team that kind of didn't really take them down, but did beat them to the title during that amazing run under Mourinho. And I think he always said that they were an unbelievable team, but they're also incredibly well drilled. And I think he really appreciates that kind of obsessive capacity to work on a team, no matter how talented your players are. And yeah, of course, he went to Bayern Munich pretty much purely to learn from him, almost because he was so fascinated by how things worked from the inside after being out from the outside so many years. But I think he differs in certain ways. I think that he's more of a kind of a well-rounded character than Guardiola, maybe. I think Guardiola is very kind of one-track obsessive, whereas I think Xabi is almost a bit like Ancelotti in many ways, in that he's a very good work-life balance, if that makes sense. So while he's very hardworking, I think he also kind of can appreciate the other things of life too. And I think he's maybe setting himself up in a more patient manner that could actually be more conducive to maybe a more long-term career than Pep, because I think Pep is very kind of short bursts of intensity, whereas I think Xabi is maybe looking to do it in a slightly different way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that sort of brings me on to a question I was going to ask you a little bit later in terms of the long term. I mean, just for now, Real Sociedad's B team, they're third tier in Spain. Why do you think Xabi Alonso, with him being such a big name, won everything there is to win within the game, why did he have to go that low down? Or was it a conscious choice to go to a club that he knows inside out? He couldn't just go into the first team. So therefore, the next best thing was Real Sociedad's B team, which of course is where he started out.
Yeah, I think it was a very conscious decision, definitely. I think when Xabi retired from football, he took kind of maybe a year out that was basically a year-long summer, he's called it in the past, with his wife and children. And I think he really took time to think about his next step and strategize his next step. So I think everything he's doing is very considered. Also, San Sebastian is obviously his home, and it's his wife's home too. And it was very important for him to have his children spend a good bit of time growing up there, to kind of get, because San Sebastian is a very special city, and it's a city that really kind of shapes its residents in many ways. And I think it's very evident in Xabi's personality, kind of the stylish, hard-working, considered individual that he is like. But for his short-term and medium-term future, his contract expires this coming summer. And I think he's done a very good job so far, but it's obviously always going to be capped in terms of, because the first team take the best players. So your progression is always going to be kind of constrained in some way. Why he went that far down, I think it's because he thought about it and decided that to properly develop as a coach, he has to learn the ropes. He's not going to be somebody who lives off his former glories as a player, but going straight into a top job and maybe kind of reveling in his celebrity somewhat. I think he found it really important to go down there and really kind of learn the ropes at a basic grassroots level. Like he's mentioned in the past that if Liverpool are playing in the Champions League on a Wednesday night and they're playing a rival at the weekend, he's going to watch the tapes of the rival's last game in the Segunda B, as opposed to watching the Liverpool match, because he doesn't want to be somebody who's living off past glories, spending his Wednesday nights in front of the TV watching teams he used to play for. He wants to be in this new world completely. And I think by going to that level, he removed himself from the world of celebrity and kind of the media spotlight somewhat, and just got to the basics of coaching and developing players, you know. So I think it's a very, very wise move. But I think that he won't be at Real Sociedad for very long. I think that when his contract is up at the end of the summer, I could very much see him going elsewhere, because I think that Emmanuel Alguacil are doing a very good job at La Real, and I don't think he'll be leaving anytime soon. And I think Xabi has already shown at Real Madrid that he's not, while he's willing to wait, he's not going to hang around forever. Like, he will move when the opportunity arises.
Yeah, that's what I was going to come to next, really. Was obviously there is kind of this expectation that he's gone to Real Sociedad's B team with one eye on the first team at some point. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because as you say, Real Sociedad, they're absolutely flying in La Liga. They've, over the last couple of seasons, really progressed and become one of the best teams in that division. So there's not really any rush to get rid of the manager they've already got. That probably pushes him towards an exit door. It might not have been in the plan to begin with, but I suppose it kind of has to be the plan now if he's going to take the next step in his progression.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Real Sociedad are probably the best placed out of the big three to challenge for a title this season. I don't think they will personally, because like it's a very, very tough ask to maintain a challenge over the course of the season, especially when you're playing in the Europa League. But I think they're very much going in the right direction under Alguacil, and I think that it's kind of a perfect synthesis of a club, a city, and a coach, because Alguacil is local as well. He's not from San Sebastian, but he's from the area. He played for the club. He understands it very, very well. He's been there since 2011, I think. He stepped in to take control of the first team for a period before going back to the B team. So he showed he's very much committed to the club. Whereas I think Xabi is very much got his sights set on hitting the elite. Like, he's spoken in the past that he'd love to coach Real Sociedad to the league title, because he didn't manage that as a player. He kind of came very close in 2003, only to lose to Real Madrid in the very end. So that's something he definitely wants to do, but I'm not sure what that looks like. Maybe he'll go somewhere else and come back. I'm not sure exactly, but I think he'll forge ahead by any means necessary. I don't think he'll leave sentiment cloud his judgment.
We mentioned two players that he developed last season who'd stepped up to the first team in Guevara and Zubimendi. You mentioned that they both sort of play in a similar-ish way to the way that he used to play, but are they the two players that you'd pick out in terms of the ones who he has developed? Has that been a real success of his management and his coaching, that he's really progressed and developed these players, even if the results are not the main thing at that level? It's more about the players that you take up and move on. And those two players, 23 and 21, they've now stepped up to the first team. Is that kind of the most important thing for him in the role that he's got right now?
Yeah, I think it's kind of very difficult, the role he has, to judge it from the outside, because obviously Segunda B games aren't televised every week. And it's not really in the media spotlight. But I think what he's doing is basically earning a name for himself within the game, as in within the kind of corridors of power, as opposed to within the media narrative. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think the job he's doing is going to be well known by Real Sociedad throughout the club, and well known by the players. And then that will spread through the world of football at that level, as opposed to in kind of the media, if that makes sense. So I think his progress is always going to be hampered, because the best players he develops will leave. But I think that what he's doing is basically kind of building reputation as well as his own knowledge in the game. Regarding those two players, they're both good players. I wouldn't say they're really like him, because there's very few players who are like him, of course, like in terms of his ability, which is kind of the elite of the elite. But yeah, they're both defensive midfielders. They're both quite aggressive. I would say Guevara is more aggressive than Zubimendi. Capable passers, kind of tactically intelligent, disciplined. They're impressive guys, but like I said, I don't think they're quite at his level, but they're good players, and they've definitely learned a lot from being under him, because I think, like I said earlier, while he was a fantastic player, I think he was also very, very good at kind of conveying his experiences to the players, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Then, just to finish off with yourself, I mean, the prospect of promotion for Real Sociedad B, I'm sure, getting back into the second tier is what they're aiming for. They're currently, I think, 8th out of 11 teams in their division, but they're only 5 points off top spot in the table. They've played 8 out of the 20 league matches. How important is it that they take that next step up? Would Xabi Alonso gain a great deal from being the man to take them back up to the second division? Or is it, as we said, is it more about individuals and bringing the team on and developing them? And if they miss out on promotion, maybe it's not the end of the world for them.
Yeah, I think that it's very difficult because, in that same division, you have Athletic Club's B team who beat them 2-1 at the weekend. And then you also have like Barricado and Amora Bieta, who are very, very strong clubs, as well as Racing of Santander. So I think it's very hard because when you're playing with younger players competing against men who are kind of seasoned professionals in the division, it's very, very difficult. Like I remember even just this kind of random comparison, but I remember in the Sunderland documentary when they were relegated to the Championship and they were playing against Barnsley. And even though Barnsley were never going to be a team that are really, they can't match them man for man, but they have the experience of being in the division, playing in those grounds, playing that style of football. And that's a very, very difficult thing to compete against. I think it's very similar to what he's going through at Real Sociedad, because he's playing against these hardened teams that are really, really experienced at that level, and they know exactly what they're doing. So I think while if he could get them promoted, it would be a fantastic achievement, I think it'd be very, very difficult. And I think the primary thing is his development and the development of players that he's working with. But if he could do that, and I'm sure that's what he has his eye on, it would be a brilliant achievement for sure. And it would definitely stand in very, very good stead.
Well, really interesting stuff there from Alan Feehely in part 1 of the podcast. And I'm now joined by Colin, Millar, editor of Spanish football website Football España. Colin, thanks for joining us. I mean, Xabi Alonso seemingly has a really distinct style of play that he's been able to imprint onto his Real Sociedad B players. And I suppose it's really impressive when a manager is able to do that and coach those players and almost, put his own mould and his own image onto a team that he's not worked with for that long.
Yeah, absolutely. Xabi Alonso's obviously come into Real Sociedad in the summer of last year, and he's made such an impression early on. And I think it was always obvious, I think, for a lot of people who played with Xabi Alonso and who coached him as well, that his intentions could always spiral into the world of coaching, because this is a guy who's obviously very smart, he's very intelligent. He's somebody that's worked under a number of top coaches in Europe. Obviously, you think of Rafa Benitez at Liverpool, but to go on with Jose Mourinho at Madrid and then to join Pep Guardiola at Bayern Munich too. And obviously, with Carlo Ancelotti, this is a guy who has spent time, not just at the top clubs, but under the top managers, under a range of different sort of styles and methods. And I think that the general consensus is that he's almost taken a bit out of all of those coaches and all of those methods and sort of molded them into his own vision of how he wants football to be played. And I think that sort of coming outside of a Spanish football bubble, to think what he does at Real Sociedad's B team is that this is a club who are in the third tier of Spanish football. It's a regionalised division. It's a club who don't have any serious ambitions of getting promoted. That isn't their main aim. The main aim of this team is to provide players directly for Real Sociedad's first team. And that is something that it's a really proud tradition of the club. And even this season alone, they have 16 players in their first team squad who were developed through their own youth system, and that's more than any other club in La Liga. So that's essentially what Xabi Alonso has been tasked to do with his side, and he's already started to do it. Even though he's only been in the job a year, he's already been credited with players' development and players being promoted into the first team. I think it's probably fair to say that Martin Zubimendi, he's gone through the B team and is now in the first team. He's also an under-21 international with Spain. And again, this is a player who's a sort of holding midfield player. He's sort of deep lying playmaker almost, and that's a very similar role and position that obviously Xabi Alonso had as a player himself. So you can immediately see that this is somebody whose techniques, whose methods, and who's telling players what to do. And I think that a key part of this is even the Bayern Munich CEO, Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, said earlier this year that Xabi Alonso could be a potential future coach of Bayern Munich, and he's not just saying that because he's a former player of the club. he actually came out and said, look, Xabi Alonso, he's so impressive because of the empathy he has with these players, the understanding and the connection he has with players. Obviously, he's only retired in the past few years, but he has a connection there, and I think he can get these methods across in a way that it's understandable and is very coherent to a modern footballer. And I think that makes the world of difference if they can be broken down in a digestible manner for them. It's really important, and I think that's something that's clear. And I think it's something that's very highly valued at a lot of elite European clubs, such as Bayern Munich and obviously such as Liverpool as well. And obviously with a coach who's a former player, the club is doing so well. That's something that's going to spark a lot of debate and possible. Is this a guy who could potentially one day come back to Anfield and be a top coach or to be the manager even? And that's something that's obviously still quite a long way off. But there's a lot of early signs from what Xabi Alonso has done and from what the people around him are saying that is hugely impressive and could potentially bode very well for the future.
Am I right in thinking that it's a sort of real increase in flair and creativity within his team that is sort of being praised as much as anything else? I mean, obviously he's got certain ways of playing, but it seems that he's giving his players a degree of freedom as well to express themselves.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? I think this is the point of the team we spoke there about. Their primary objective isn't to get promoted. There's no sort of great weight on these players' shoulders to meet any sort of expectations, and to think that this is Real Sociedad's B team and they're playing at the same level that the first team of, say, Deportivo La Coruña are at the minute. And this is obviously a club who were in the Champions League semi-finals not so many years ago, and that makes the world of difference. These players don't have the weight of expectations that those at other clubs at this level do. These are players who can go out and express themselves. So that's why I think this current job is a very good fit for Xabi Alonso, because he can go out and he can coach his players to play in this certain method, in this certain stylistic approach that will sort of ease their transition into first team football in the years to come. And the teams around them are all senior players. These are all players in their late 20s, early 30s. And I know that obviously the Athletic Club Bilbao, there are B teams in this league as well, but they are surrounded by rival clubs who are much more streetwise. They're at a level where, they probably are conditioned more towards winning matches without particularly being so loyal to a certain style of play. But it's a different set of objectives, as I said. And I think that's important for young coaches to be given this opportunity. And I think the comparison's been drawn quite a lot with others who've come through this sort of way of coaching a B team at this level. And obviously Pep Guardiola did that at Barcelona before he was promoted to the first team coach position. So there's a lot of indications that this is a great platform for Xabi Alonso. And the fact that, as you say, he has implemented a style which is probably a bit more expressive for his players. He's given a set of instructions essentially by the club to be like, look, we want you playing in this certain manner. We want you developing players and everything else. But of course, he's got his own sort of way of implementing that and bringing that forward. And I think that can be seen as well in their results, and the type of players that are being brought through are players who may not necessarily be attacking players, but who have that general mindset of expressing themselves and not being afraid of trying passes and trying to take risks on the pitch as well. And obviously that's within a controlled environment, but I think sometimes that in modern coaching that can almost be coached out of players. It's almost like the CF option, like coaches and players, they want to just tick boxes, they want to sort of get through things. I don't think that's the case here, and you can see that by the type of player that's already coming through at La Real and what's being done at the minute. And I think that's generally what's viewed as a consensus as being very impressive.
Yeah, lots of creativity, lots of exciting sort of football being played. But he obviously played under Rafa Benitez. He played under Jose Mourinho as well. Are there sort of elements of those sorts of managers within what he's doing as well? Because you'd think that, those are big managers and big personalities that he's worked with. You'd think that would have rubbed off in some way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's exactly the thing when you look at the sort of European coaching circles of the past 10 or 15 years and the contrast of Guardiola and Mourinho and what they coach and what their players, what sort of mindset their players will inherit is almost completely at odds. And as you said, the fact that Alonso has had both of those influences on his own career, and obviously Rafa Benitez and spoke of Carlo Ancelotti as well. Like, these are all managers with different ideas of how to control games and how to develop players and what is the right way of coaching, the right way of playing. So yeah, it's almost like a hybrid of all that. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people thought that Xabi Alonso was going to take this coaching route. And it's also a similarity to Pep Guardiola again, in the sense that these are players who've obviously gone into coaching, but have gone through playing in a similar position on the pitch as this sort of deep line midfielder who can kind of organise all those around them, who can see the pitch, who not just in terms of keeping possession and retaining the ball, but finding space and creating space for others. This is something that's been a sort of trend throughout their playing careers, and it's almost like a natural evolution as such to go into coaching from that playing point of view. And so those are all qualities that he's had. And yeah, I mean, listen, to play under a Guardiola team and to play under a Mourinho team, they're almost completely contrasting in terms of that sort of holding midfield role. But yeah, that's something again. The sort of hybrid of that is, it's really interesting to see how he will then take that into his coaching career, because maybe a lot of people might contrast that with, say, Steven Gerrard, who's obviously gone on to play to coach Rangers after his playing career at Liverpool. But I suppose the difference there is that Gerrard never had this sort of wholesome approach that Alonso has had in terms of his own playing career. Obviously, having played at 3 or 4 different elite clubs, it almost gives you a different coaching perspective, and it'd be really interesting to see then and to contrast just how their coaching careers and their management styles develop from there. But yeah, it's one definitely to keep an eye on.
I think there's an interesting comparison with Mikel Arteta to be made as well. They played for the same youth team. They came through at a similar time. They're very good friends, as far as I'm aware. I mean, it seems with Arsenal and Arteta, they have a very regimented style of play. They want to do things in a very exact sort of way. It's almost like a scientific approach to playing football. Is there any sort of element of that with Alonso? Because it sort of seems like they've gone 2 different ways in a sort of coaching sense, even though they've come through at Sociedad, they've played for top clubs. They seem to have gone about it in slightly differing ways.
Yeah, again, it's a really interesting way of contrasting it, because, as you said, they came from a very similar background, obviously coming up through the same Real Sociedad sort of youth academy. And again, I suppose that's the kind of contrast in the playing careers. Whereas, Xabi Alonso's played at Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, obviously at Liverpool as well. Whereas Mikel Arteta spent a lot of his prime career really at Everton under David Moyes, and he obviously played for a spell at Arsenal too. He played obviously with Rangers in Scotland, and I guess that maybe the fact that he has come through this more of a focus of British football and a British sort of mentality of coaching, which could, I suppose, mean a different style. I think whenever you look at Arteta at Arsenal at the moment, he does seem to be obsessed in terms of numbers, in terms of crossing numbers and set pieces, and the sort of the statistical sort of side of football. Whereas I haven't really got that impression from Alonso, and obviously he hasn't had the same sort of profile of management or the kind of exposure in terms of the media that Arteta has. But it seems unlikely that they would have the same sort of approach to coaching and instructions of what their teams want to do. And again, it's something that's really interesting, because I think that many people had this impression of Mikel Arteta whenever he was appointed, that having been a coach directly under Guardiola, that he would almost implement this same sort of style of play. And that hasn't really been the case at all. It's more been the case of defensive structure and sort of the keeping things tight, and then exploiting your sort of crossing situations, which isn't really comparable at all. And that's something that's really interesting. Again, it's the influence of a playing career on a coach, and what their sort of stylistic mold has comprised of, and how they've come up with these ideas. And I suppose it's the influence of the managers they've played under, and that is again something that makes Alonso a particularly interesting case.
And moving forward then with Alonso, I mean, Real Sociedad are doing really, really well in La Liga. It doesn't look like their manager is going to move on anytime soon. But what do you think the next step is for Alonso? And what do you think the end goal is for him as well? Do you think it is a Liverpool, a Real Madrid, a Bayern Munich that he's got his eye on maybe, I don't know, in 5-10 years' time?
Yeah, it is. Again, it's a really interesting thing, because Xabi Alonso, he's obviously in an environment now which is his home city, his hometown. He's surrounded by friends and family, and like the Real Sociedad B team coaching role, it is obviously a relatively low-key, low-profile role, and there is a sense, and there are suggestions that is something that he just wanted at the moment. He hasn't really asserted himself in terms of, I'm definitely going down a coaching or managerial route, which again is something that can be contrasted with, say, Steven Gerrard, He was always very sort of like, I'm going to do my coaching badges at Liverpool. I want to get into a management role kind of early in my career. He's always very assertive about that. Whereas Alonso's slightly different. You kind of have the impression that he has the ability and the potential to become an elite coach, certainly if not a manager. And that's something that's going to be interesting to see if he actually wants to go down that route. And there are suggestions that at the moment, yes, he is enjoying his role at Real Sociedad, but does he want to stay in the game? Does he want the added pressures and the added expectations of going to a bigger club? And again, there are suggestions, and there's been nothing official, but that there have been approaches from other clubs who have said to him, like, we would be interested in maybe taking you on as a high level coach, either at youth level or with the first team in some capacity. And he hasn't obviously accepted that role if that has been the case. And so it'll be interesting to see how long he wants to stay. Obviously, Real Sociedad are doing very well at the minute. Neyman Alguacil, who's their first team coach, again, he came through the youth academy. He coached the youth teams, and there's a sense that Xabi Alonso has he gone through the same system? Is he going to take the reins at the first team whenever Alguacil departs? But there's no real suggestion that that's going to happen anytime soon. And they're certainly, if not, they're probably not competing for the title in Spain at the moment, but certainly a top 4 or a top 6 place would be their objective this season. And it's hard to see that Alguacil's position is going to change anytime soon. So yeah, it'll be a case of waiting and seeing, I think, for Alonso. I don't think that position is going to open up, and it'll just be interesting to see, is he going to be content with the role he has at the minute? I mean, obviously it gives him a sense of fulfillment and achievement to see these players progress and be developed into the first team, and he's obviously played an influence in that. But is he going to want to take a higher profile role at a club who can maybe give him the opportunities that maybe Real Sociedad can't? And that's no slight to them. They're obviously a fantastic club, but he's got a lot of admirers, and it's going to be really interesting to see, certainly within the next year or two, what he decides to do. And you do think that he will have a lot of influence over that decision, and it's just not quite clear yet what it is that he wants.
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting stuff. Thanks to Colin. It's going to be really, really fascinating to sort of keep track of what Xabi Alonso does next. And I'm sure this won't be the last podcast that we put together on him. Of course, Xabi Alonso, not just for Liverpool, but for Real Madrid, for Bayern Munich, for so many clubs, a wonderful footballer. And it does seem like he's starting to transmit some of that knowledge onto the next generation at the club he started out at, of course, Real Sociedad. Could he be Liverpool manager one day? Quite possibly, it seems, as long as that's what he wants, because it certainly seems like he's on the right path to the very top.